I would like to welcome you all to this recorded presentation of an introduction to the Leaving Certificate Art Specification. This specification is built around the artistic process and how it supports learning. Art is both creative and expressive, and it provides an opportunity for the development of the necessary skills for creative engagement with the world. The study of art promotes the development and understanding of a sense of the aesthetic. You may not be familiar with the new educational support service Oide. Oide is a new Department of Education support service for schools, officially launched on September 1st, 2023. The service is a result of the integration of CSL, JCT, NIPT and the PDST, bringing together a wealth of expertise and resources to better support our educational system. This opportunity to introduce the Visual Art/Art team, which consists of 4 full-time members. Senior leader Margaret O'Shea and 3 professional learning leaders, Stephanie Hodgers, Orla Doyle and Roisin Rouse. In addition to our full-time members, we also have a number of part-time associate teachers working in a range of school contexts from around the country, as represented by the orange dots on our map. We are very grateful for all the work that they do to support the team and give us insights into their classrooms. Let us take a quick look at an overview of this presentation. We will become familiar with the Leaving Certificate Art Specification, explore the specification strands, strand units and associated learning outcomes, and then examine visual studies, the framework and the content areas. Before we take a detailed look at the specification, let us begin by considering the continuum of art education in post-primary schools in Ireland and how it supports the development of creativity, self-expression and critical thinking. Throughout this continuum, students engage in observing, responding to, creating art and expressing this through their use of critical and visual language. It is important to recognise that each part of this continuum is interconnected and no sector or cycle should be seen in isolation. Let us consider the rationale, aim and objective of the Leaving Certificate specification and how it supports students as they progress through the continuum of art education into senior cycle. The rationale states that the specification is built around the artistic process and how it supports learning. The Leaving Certificate Art aims to develop in learners the knowledge, skills, understanding and value needed to bring an idea to realization and to respond to, understand, analyse and evaluate their own work and the work of others. The objectives of the Leaving Certificate Art specification are to enable learners to develop aesthetic awareness and understanding, develop critical, practical, conceptual, manual and problem-solving skills, as well as an understanding of the iterative approach that will be involved, develop research, communication and reflective skills, engage with current practitioners and connect with current practice through galleries, museums, contemporary art spaces, and real-life encounters with the wider art community. Appreciate and respond critically to their own work and that of their peers, as well as society and their environment, gain an understanding of visual studies and the critical and visual language that supports it, and appreciate and enjoy the process involved in researching, creating and responding to art as a lifelong skill. The key skills are embedded in the rationale, aim and objective of the art specification. Learners have already encountered the key skills at junior cycle. Through the subjects and short courses offered, students have been provided with opportunities to develop a range of key skills. These key skills are developed further as students enter and progress through senior cycle. There are 5 key skills at senior cycle: communicating, being personally effective, working with others, critical and creative thinking and information processing. And as you can see from the diagram, the learner is placed at the centre. These key skills play an important part in all learners achieving their potential, both during their time in school and in the future. They also enable learners to participate fully in society and the world of work. But what will this look like for the learner in the art classroom? Let's take, for example, critical and creative thinking. This key skill could be developed by scaffolding the student in their reflective practices and making informed decisions about their work. Or for example, the key skill of information processing. This key skill could be brought to life for the learner through researching skills, analysing artwork, experimenting with media and making critical judgments about the potentials and limitations of that media. Similarly, this key skill could be developed through the exploration of techniques. We can see that the key skills are interlinked to one another and lend to each other. Take a moment to pause the video and consider, how will students develop the senior cycle key skills through art? And what will this look like for the learner? The key skills open up many possibilities for cross-curricular engagement. And the art specification states that all senior cycle subjects have close links with art. The Leaving Certificate Art Specification is presented in 3 strands: create, research, and respond. The key skills are embedded in the learning outcomes associated with these strands. The 3 strands of create, research, and respond are interlinked and interdependent, and they are all supportive of the artistic process. Each of these strands are divided into strand units. In the create strand, it is divided into the strand units of making, contextual inquiries, processes, realization, and presenting. Within the research strand, we have looking, recording and documenting, experimentation and interpretation, contextual inquiries, and processes. And within the respond strand, we have the strand units of analysis, contextual inquiries, impact and value, critical and personal reflection, and processes. While the strand units are numbered, this is for ease of identification and does not imply a hierarchy of approach. While the learning outcomes associated with each strand are set out separately, this does not imply that they are to be studied in isolation. The learner's engagement and learning are optimized by a fully integrated experience of all 3 strands, as outlined on page 12 of the Leaving Certificate Art Specification. Each strand unit have learning outcomes associated with it. The learning outcomes are found on pages 15 to 18 of the specification. The strand units are shown as students learn about, while the learning outcomes are identified as students should be able to. Learning outcomes must be used when planning units of learning for both the practical and written work, and it is important to remember that learning outcomes should be achievable to each learner's ability level. Outcomes are described in the NCCA's Focus on Learning series as statements in the curriculum specification to describe the knowledge, understanding, skills, and values students should be able to demonstrate after a period of learning. Learning outcomes provide the building blocks for teachers to plan their teaching, learning, and assessment. Let us consider one of the strand units and its associated learning outcomes in detail, and how it might be used in planning a unit of learning. For example, if we look at the create strand and the strand unit processes, we can see that there are a number of learning outcomes associated with it. When writing your plans, consider what learning is occurring when the student engages with the learning outcome, and what is the focus of the intended learning that you want the students to achieve. And there may be incidental learning happening in relation to the remaining learning outcomes from that strand unit. Learning outcomes should meet the needs of all students. The unit of learning should be accessible and achievable to each learner's ability level. In learning outcomes, we carefully consider the action verb and what we want the students to know, understand, and be able to do after the period of learning. We're going to examine in detail one learning outcome from the create strand and the strand unit processes. Relate their researches, processes, and decisions that led to their realized work. Let's consider that action verb relate. The glossary at the back of the specification describes it as associate, give reason. By choosing this learning outcome, we must ask ourselves, what do we want the students to know, understand, and be able to do in relation to that action verb and the intended learning? We've given you a lot of information at this stage. You might take some time to pause this recording and reflect on what impact this may have on your planning.
Now let us take a look at visual studies. In the specification, Visual studies refers to the study of the visual expressions of all aspects of culture created by past, recent, modern and contemporary societies. By researching, creating and responding to work, students will learn to know and understand the work they make as well as works by other artists. The use of visual studies is central to teaching and learning, whether students are engaging in the practical or written component. This definition allows greater scope for the selection of artists and artworks to support students' learning. Visual studies can be embedded in all stages of the student's creative process, from informing their theme to expanding practice through exploration of materials and the artistic process of others. Through their engagement with visual studies, the learner will come to understand how it can enhance and inform their own work. The Visual Studies Framework was developed to support students and teachers in planning for teaching and learning. The framework is structured around 6 framework elements. These elements should be used when the student is engaging and learning about visual studies for both the practical work or written work. There are 3 main content areas within visual studies. All 3 content areas create opportunities for students to explore and engage in a variety of art-led experiences in both their practical and written work. The learner is always at the centre. The 6 framework elements are context, artist and artworks, analysis, art elements and design principles, media and areas of practice, and innovation and invention. These elements help students to understand what occurred before the period or movement being focused on, the period or movement itself, and any effects of the period or movement on later ideas or artworks. The 3 visual studies content areas are Europe and the wider world, Ireland and its place in the wider world, and today's world. We are now going to take a closer look at these content areas. Each content area is divided into sections of focus. Europe and the wider world. This broadly covers the canon of Western art from Romanesque and Gothic periods to the present day. Take a look at the sections of focus. Ireland and its place in the wider world. This broadly covers a selection of significant periods of art as experienced in Ireland across the centuries. However, it is important that connections to Europe and the wider world are made where relevant. Take a look at those sections of focus. For the written component, the student must choose one section of focus within Content Area 1 and one section of focus within Content Area 2 to study. Students should address all 6 framework elements when studying these content areas. Now let us consider today's world. This broadly covers critical literacy and contextual inquiry to decode, decipher and make meaning of a range of art-led experiences that students can study locally, nationally, internationally or virtually. Students are encouraged to explore, experience and reflect on art and culture in their everyday lives through 4 sections of focus. Artist theory and thinking, artist process and media, art as social commentary or commentator, and art and the environment. For the written component, students will study all sections of focus in Content Area 3. Students should refer to the Visual Studies Framework when studying Content Area 3 where relevant. It should also be noted that Content Area 3, today's world, should not be seen in isolation, and students need to be made aware that links can be formed with Content Area 1 and 2, Europe and the wider world, and Ireland and its place in the wider world. We are going to take a closer look at the framework elements and their description. The framework elements should be used when the student is learning about visual studies for both written and practical work. The language used to describe the framework elements helps to support the development of students' critical and visual language. The descriptions of the framework elements can be found on page 24 to 25 of the specification. During our national seminars, we engaged in an activity where participants worked collaboratively to gain a shared understanding of the framework elements. They read the element description cards and picked out the key learning and considered how this can be used to support students as they engage with learning experiences. It is important that students have a good understanding of the framework elements. Some students may find the language difficult. In order to scaffold the learning, the key points or learning could be shared with them initially. In some cases, simplifying the language to suit the age, stage and school context, eventually building on the learning to develop students' critical and visual language and disciplinary literacy. We will examine one of the framework element descriptions in detail now and consider how it might be used to learn about examples of art. Take, for example, the framework element context. What could be important to consider under the element of context? For example, if students were studying Content Area 1, Europe and the Wider World, and the section of focus, Realism, Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. What happened before the movement? Circumstances surrounding a period. What led to the development of realism? What was happening in Paris or France during that time? The historical, political, social, economic and ideological situation. How did that impact the work and the artists of that time? The Franco-Parisian War, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the working class. What role did patrons and agencies play in promoting art and artists? The Salon de Refusés, Durand Ruel's, for example. How did other examples of visual culture that existed around their chosen area influence the artist's work? Take, for example, for realism, impressionism and post-impressionism. They might look at the influences of photography, landscape, urban and rural design or architecture. This is how the element context could be used to explore, understand and learn about that section of focus. When studying a section of focus, discussions and questions can be built around this element in your classroom. After this presentation, take some time to review the remaining 5 framework elements and consider how they might be used to support learning. We have created a graphic organizer that could be used to facilitate the exploration of visual studies for Content Area 1, Europe and the Wider World, and Content Area 2, Ireland and its place in the wider world for the written component. This graphic organizer is available on the Oide website under Post-Primary Art Senior Cycle. This could be used for group work, revision, a quick test, quizzes or self-directed student research. This is an example of teachers using the graphic organizer to explore a content area and a section of focus. The teachers chose the content area Ireland and its place in the wider world and the section of focus pre-Christian. For the purpose of this activity, they decided to focus on the Bronze Age. They used the element description to aid their discussion. They recorded the learning that can be realised in each of the framework elements on post-it notes and placed them on the poster. Under the framework element context, they mentioned such things as the circumstances surrounding the period, following on from the Stone Age, such as the influences from England and Europe and how people settled into larger communities. Another group of teachers chose the Content Area 1, Europe and the Wider World, and the section of focus selected was Realism, Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. They decided to focus on the artist Monet. They used the element description to aid the discussion. Once again, they recorded the learning that can be realised in each framework element on post-it notes and place them on the poster. Under the framework element context, they mention the historical, political, social, economic and ideological context of the time, the power of the salon, the rise of different social classes, the Industrial Revolution, the Franco-Parisian War, and the appearance of Japanese art in France. Under the framework element innovation and invention, they mention the camera and influence photography had on art, the advances in the understanding of colour theory, invention of paint in tubes leading to plein air painting. We mentioned earlier that visual studies could influence student practical and written work. Just because a student studies an example of art for their written work, it doesn't mean that it couldn't influence the work they are currently making or may make later. You might take some time now to pause the recording and reflect on your own planning practices. When learning about examples of visual studies for the written component, are there opportunities where it can support, inform, or influence students' practical work?
As we mentioned earlier, for the written component, the student must choose one section of focus within Content Area 1, Europe and the wider world, and one section of focus within Content Area 2, Ireland and its place in the wider world to study. But for Content Area 3, Today's World, all 4 sections of focus must be studied. Artists, Theory and Thinking, Artists, Processes and Media, Art as Social Commentary or Commentator, Art and the Environment. Students should refer to the Visual Studies framework elements, context, artists and artworks, analysis, art elements and design principles, media and areas of practice, and innovation and invention when studying Content Area 3. This is taken from our Leaving Cert Art Specification on page 29. We will now examine one section of focus description in detail, as the descriptions support the student critical and visual language. Take, for example, the section of focus Art and the Environment. Once again, we have highlighted some of the key learning. From reading the section of focus Art and the Environment, what is the student learning about when examining this section of focus? Initially, students will understand and view art and the environment from a number of shifting perspectives. The environment could be used as a primary source as inspiration, for example, Monet and the water lilies. It could be used as a media in its own right. For example, ceramicist Elaine Harrington discussed how she often uses the earth as medium. Her research into clay and its possibilities refer to how it has informed her process and practice, which links to another section of focus. The environment as your local environment, which can also be a source of inspiration. Students will also examine how environmental artwork addresses social and political issues. Here we can see how links can be formed with art as social commentary or commentator. In this section of focus, students will learn how to question and become sensitive to the world around them, their place, the space and impact within it. Observing issues such as sustainable development in social, economical, biophysical, historical and cultural context. This is how the section of focus Art and the Environment could be used to explore and understand art-led experiences as students engage with today's world. When studying a section of focus, discussions and questions can be built around this language in your classroom. After this video, take some time to review the remaining 3 sections of focus for today's world and consider the key learning. It should be noted that the specification states to varying degrees all 4 sections are interconnected and should be referred to where relevant. Students should become familiar with the descriptions associated with the sections of focus for today's world and the framework elements. Here is an example of a graphic organizer that could be used to explore Content Area 3, Today's World, for the written component. Students are encouraged to explore, experience and reflect on art and culture in their everyday lives. Today's World aims to foster and nurture the skills of critical literacy and contextual inquiry to decode, decipher and make meaning from a range of art-led experiences that students can study locally, nationally, internationally or virtually. There are many possible approaches to this, including students engaging with art in the public domain, such as visiting local or national galleries and museums, engaging with the built and natural environment, visiting an artist in their studio, or interventions by the art world within the school, such as artists in the classroom projects. You could bring an artist, designer or craft person into the classroom, interview the artist, engage in practical workshops, interactive or immersive experiences. Students will learn about today's world and its associated sections of focus through these types of art-led experiences. Pause the video now and consider, what art-led experiences might your students engage with? Perhaps begin with what is available in your local area.
We will now take a general look at the overview of the Leaving Certificate Art Specification. The new art specification envisions that there be 180 hours of class contact time, and students sat the first exam in 2023. In the specification, differentiation is addressed three ways: through the learning outcomes of the specification, in the process of teaching and learning, and through assessment. It is important to note that the section's advice for teachers and students remains online at curriculumonline.ie. As you can see, there are four sections: advice for teachers, advice for students, visual studies, the visual studies framework and practical work, and lastly, the art sketchpad. You can click on the white down arrow keys at the side of the tab to access the information. The new specification will be assessed at both ordinary and higher level. The assessment of the Leaving Certificate Art comprises of three elements: the practical coursework component, an invigilated practical exam, and a written examination. The practical coursework is 50% of the overall marks of Leaving Certificate Art, and the invigilated practical exam is 20%. The written examination accounts for 30%, and we will look in detail at the assessment components in the upcoming slides. As mentioned earlier, the practical coursework and the invigilated practical examination are two separate but related components and can be considered to form a single project, which will be completed in the final year of study. Both practical components will be based on the same stimulus, which will be chosen by the learner from a coursework brief issued by the State Examination Commission. In the brief, the State Examination Commission will outline the time period in which the practical coursework must be completed. During this period, candidates will carry out the development work related to the creation of two artefacts. The first artefact, Artefact A, will be realised during the coursework period and is worth 250 marks. The second artefact, Artefact B, will be realised during the invigilated practical examination, which is worth 100 marks. The practical examination will take place closely after the completion of the practical coursework within a 3-day window period. It is a 5-hour exam to be completed in a single day. It is important to note that the two realised pieces should be created in two distinctly different areas of practice, as stated on page 14 of the specification and point 8 of the State Examination Brief. Over the 2 years at senior cycle, students can choose to study any areas of practice available to them within their school context and setting. The new art specification introduced us to areas of practice. Some of us may have previously called these disciplines. The specification states on page 13 that there are a range of areas of practice available within art for learners to study. While all may not be available within a specific school setting, learners can study any of those areas of practice available to them in a range of traditional, contemporary, new and/or digital media, or a combination of these. As with the practical examination, the written examination will be examined at both higher and ordinary level. Both will have a range and balance of question types suited to visual studies and the application of practical knowledge. The questions will focus on a broad understanding of visual studies and will require learners to demonstrate knowledge and understanding and ability to apply, analyse, evaluate and respond as appropriate. This examination consists of 3 sections. Each section is worth 50 marks, totaling 150 marks for the written paper. Today's world will have a range of questions of varying lengths and varying mark allocations. Some of these will be based on visual stimulus material. The number of questions may vary from year to year, typically between 3 and 7, depending on their length. Candidates will answer all questions in this section. Europe and the wider world will have 6 long questions, based on each of the sections of focus within visual studies. Candidates will answer one question from this section. Ireland and its place in the wider world will have 6 long questions based on each of the sections of focus within visual studies. Candidates will answer one question from this section. It's important to remember that the resources from Junior Cycle and Senior Cycle can still be found on the JCT and PDST websites respectively, and that you may find further resources and supports there available to support you as you engage in the new Leaving Certificate Art specification. In addition to this, further CPD supports can be found online at Oide, and teachers are invited to book now to register and avail of upcoming CPD events. You may also want to follow the Visual Art team on X, formerly known as Twitter, at ija_art_visart. You may also find supports in CPD of interest on the IJA Creativity website at www.creativity.ija.ie, and you may like to follow the team on X at ija_creativity. And finally, we would like to thank you for your time and engaging with this recording. It is important to take some time to reflect on the learning that has occurred here. We hope this information supports you in your planning moving forward.